1 second later, the mirror showed the truth. The mirror had always been treated like an ordinary object, just a piece of glass in a frame, reflecting what the eye wanted to see. But on that one strange day it began to show something far greater than the surface. It showed the truth that no one could hide, not even from themselves. 1 second later, when people stood before it, they no longer saw their neat hair, clean clothes, when forced smiles. Instead they saw the stories behind their eyes, the secrets carried in their hearts, the lies they told the world, when the fears they whispered in the silence of the night. This mirror did not care about beauty or status. It cared only about truth, and the truth was heavier than any crown, harsher than any punishment, and brighter than any light. 1 second later, a proud businessman who thought his wealth made him untouchable stepped in front of the mirror. He expected to see the image of power, his expensive suit, his golden watch, his confident smile. But the mirror tore away the layers of wealth and pride and showed him the hungry children who lost their homes because of his greed, the workers whose sweat built his empire while he paid them crumbs, and the emptiness of his victories because they were never earned with honesty. His heart trembled as the mirror revealed that his wealth was not a sign of success but a mountain of sins balanced on the suffering of others. For the first time in years, his hands shook, not because of losing money but because of facing himself. 1 second later, a gentle mother stood before the mirror, tired from a lifetime of caring for others and never caring for herself. She expected to see only her wrinkles and her exhaustion, but the mirror went deeper. It showed her sleepless nights holding sick children, her prayers whispered when no one else was watching, the meals she skipped so her family could eat, and the strength she had always denied herself. She broke into tears, not of sadness but of relief, because for the first time, she saw that her sacrifices had not gone unnoticed. But her quiet love was her greatest strength. The truth told her that she was not weak, not ordinary, but a silent warrior carrying the world on her shoulders. 1 second later, a soldier came to the mirror. His chest was filled with medals, and his back was straight with pride. He expected to see honor, courage, and victory. But the mirror pierced deeper than the uniform and showed the sleepless nights, the screams of war, the innocent lives caught in battles, and the haunting memories he carried like scars in his heart. He saw not only the enemies he defeated but also the humanity lost in each fight. Tears filled his eyes because the mirror did not show a hero or a villain. It showed a man who had given pieces of his soul to a war that could never return them. The truth was not glory but sacrifice. But he realized that bravery is not about fighting battles. It is about carrying the weight of them without breaking. 1 second later, a young girl who hated her reflection stood in front of the mirror. She had always believed she was too plain, too ugly, too unworthy of being noticed. She expected the mirror to laugh at her insecurities. But instead, the mirror showed the strength she had never seen. The kindness in her eyes, the patience in her heart, the way her smile once lit up her friend's darkest day, and the resilience that kept her alive through storms. She realized that beauty was never in the skin but in the soul, and the mirror freed her from the prison of comparison. The truth told her she was more than enough, and she finally smiled, not because she looked different, and because she felt different. 1 second later, a bully stood before the mirror. He expected to see his power, his strong body, and the fear he forced upon others. But the mirror stripped away the mask and showed the broken child inside, the loneliness that drove him to hurt others, the rejection that hardened his heart, and the tears he never allowed himself to shed. He saw that every punch he threw was not an act of strength but a cry for help. The mirror revealed that cruelty is never born from power, it is born from pain. And in that moment, he fell to his knees, realizing the truth that healing himself was the only way to stop hurting others. 1 second later, a thief walked to the mirror, carrying pockets filled with stolen treasures. He smiled proudly, thinking he had won the game of life. But the mirror showed him the faces of the people he robbed. The mother who lost the money meant for her child's medicine, the man who could not pay rent, the fear in the eyes of those he had threatened. The mirror made every stolen coin burn in his hands until he could not hold them anymore. He realized that nothing stolen could ever fill the emptiness in his soul. The truth was merciless but necessary. It told him that wealth without honesty is only a curse. 1 second later, a corrupt leader stood in front of the mirror. His chest puffed with pride, his voice full of lies, his throne built on fear. He expected to see the image of power, the reflection of someone untouchable. But the mirror revealed the crumbling foundation of his rule. The citizens who starved while he feasted, the broken promises, the lives lost because of his greed. He saw himself not as a ruler but as a thief of trust. The truth roared louder than his speeches. That power built on lies collapses faster than sand in water. 1 second later, a teacher approached the mirror. She felt tired, underappreciated, and forgotten. She expected to see only the dull reflection of someone ordinary. But the mirror revealed thousands of souls carrying her lessons, the laughter of children she once inspired, the hope she planted in students who went on to change the world. She saw that her work was not invisible, it was eternal. The truth reminded her that real success is not measured by fame or wealth, but by the lives one touches along the way. 1 second later, a liar stood before the mirror. He always boasted about how clever he was, how easily he could trick others. But the mirror showed the loneliness in his eyes, the people who had walked away from him, the walls he built that kept love out. The mirror stripped away every lie and left only the broken man who could not even trust himself. The truth whispered that lies may fool others, but they always destroy the liar first. 1 second later, a grieving widow came to the mirror. She expected to see only her pain and her loss, but the mirror surprised her. It showed her husband's love reflected through her, the memories they built, the strength that still lived inside her. She realized that love never dies. It only changes form, becoming part of the soul forever. The truth gave her comfort that grief is not an end. It is proof that love was real. 1 second later, a gambler stood before the mirror. He expected to see thrill and victory. But the mirror revealed chains of addiction, the debts crushing his family, the tears of his children. Every card, every coin was soaked in sorrow. The truth showed him that chasing luck only leads to losing everything. 1 second later, a prisoner walked to the mirror. He expected to see punishment, shame, and chains. But the mirror showed choices, mistakes, and the possibility of change. It revealed that prison is not only walls outside but walls inside the soul. And only truth can break them. He realized that freedom begins not when doors open but when hearts do. 1 second later, a child stood before the mirror. She expected to see weakness because adults always told her she was too small. But the mirror revealed the courage in her laughter, the fire in her imagination, and the strength waiting to grow. The truth told her that greatness is never about size but about spirit. 1 second later, an artist looked into the mirror. He thought he was a failure because his work was not appreciated. But the mirror showed him the emotions hidden in his paintings, the lives his art had quietly healed, the truths his colors carried. He realized that art is not about applause but about honesty. And the truth gave him purpose again. 1 second later, a selfish man stood before the mirror. He expected to see his wealth and possessions. But the mirror showed him emptiness. Because everything he collected had no meaning. He realized the truth, that when you live only for yourself you end up with nothing. 1 second later, a kind stranger stepped to the mirror. He expected nothing special. But the mirror revealed waves of kindness spreading from his small acts. The person he helped today helping someone tomorrow. The chain of good growing endlessly. The truth made him smile. Because even the smallest kindness can echo forever. 1 second later, the world as a whole looked into the mirror. Nations, religions, and races expected to see their differences. But the mirror showed one humanity, one shared pain, one shared hope. The truth reminded everyone that what divides us is smaller than what unites us. And finally, 1 second later, the mirror shattered. But its truth did not vanish. It lived in every soul that had seen itself. because once you see the truth, you can never return to lies. 1 second later, a young boy who spent his life comparing himself to others stepped in front of the mirror. He always believed he was not smart enough, not fast enough, not good enough to matter. But the mirror stripped away his self-doubt and revealed the hidden sparks of brilliance inside him. The kindness that made his friends feel safe, the creativity that turned simple things into magic, the resilience that kept him standing after every failure. The mirror showed him that the world did not need another copy. It needed him exactly as he was. The truth made him realize that comparison kills uniqueness. And uniqueness is life's greatest gift. 1 second later, a jealous woman who lived her days watching others' success approached the mirror. She expected to see her face covered in beauty products and fake smiles. Instead, the mirror showed her heart, darkened by envy, weakened by bitterness. She saw herself wasting years resenting others instead of building her own dreams. The mirror showed her that jealousy is like drinking poison and hoping others suffer. The truth cut her deeply. But it was also a cure. She realized that her time was her own. But she could either waste it envying or use it creating. 1 second later, a politician stepped forward, used to cameras, applause, and manipulation. He expected the mirror to glorify him. But the mirror revealed the betrayed promises written across his lips, the tears of citizens who trusted him, and the corruption that soaked his hands like invisible ink. He saw that his speeches were empty echoes and his leadership was nothing but greed wearing a suit. For the first time, he stood silent. Because truth does not negotiate. Because the mirror had spoken more powerfully than any microphone ever could. 1 second later, a lonely teenager stood in front of the mirror. She always saw herself as invisible, as someone who never mattered to anyone. But the mirror showed her the smiles she created when she helped her friends, the comfort her presence gave to a sad classmate, the way her little brother looked up to her as his whole world. She realized that even when she felt unseen, she was a light in someone else's darkness. The truth gave her hope that she was not invisible, she was essential. 1 second later, a man addicted to his phone and social media stepped in front of the mirror. He expected to see likes, followers, and the image of success. But the mirror revealed a hollow heart, empty connections, and wasted time slipping away like sand. It showed him the family he ignored, the opportunities he missed, the real world he abandoned for a digital illusion. The truth made him tremble because he realized that validation online was not love, it was noise. Real love was waiting outside the screen. And he was losing it. 1 second later, a scientist who spent his life searching for answers looked into the mirror. He expected to see facts, formulas, and certainty. Instead, the mirror showed him the faces of those his inventions had helped and harmed, the possibilities he had unleashed, and the dangers he ignored. The mirror whispered that knowledge is not the same as wisdom. And the truth struck him harder than any discovery. He realized that progress without responsibility is destruction wearing a mask of brilliance. 1 second later, an artist drowning in self-doubt approached the mirror. He thought he was wasting his life painting canvases no one bought. But the mirror showed him the people who stood silently before his art, finding healing in the colors, hope in the shapes, courage in the stories he never spoke but painted. The truth showed him that art is never measured by money but by impact. And his work was far more powerful than he imagined. 1 second later, a prisoner of anger faced the mirror. He had destroyed friendships, broken his own family, and blamed the world for his pain. The mirror reflected not his muscles or loud voice, but the scared child within him who had been hurt long ago. It showed him that his anger was not power, it was a cage. The truth was hard, but it whispered that forgiveness, both of himself and others, was the only key to freedom. 1 second later, a greedy merchant came to the mirror. His eyes sparkled with wealth, but the mirror showed his soul starving. It revealed the loneliness of always chasing more, the emptiness of owning everything but having no one to share it with. The truth told him that greed is not abundance. It is hunger without end. He realized too late that joy cannot be bought. It must be shared. 1 second later, a young bride preparing for her wedding looked into the mirror. She expected to see beauty and celebration. But the mirror showed her hidden fears, doubts about her partner's loyalty, and the cracks in a relationship she was trying to cover with makeup and flowers. The truth was painful, but it saved her from a lifetime of regret. The mirror showed her that love without trust is only decoration, not foundation. 1 second later, a man who had betrayed his closest friend faced the mirror. He expected to see cleverness, but the mirror showed him guilt carved into his eyes, the hurt on his friend's face, but the loneliness of losing someone who once trusted him blindly. The truth told him that betrayal is not cleverness, it is cowardice. It destroys more than bonds. It destroys the betrayer from within. 1 second later, a widow who blamed herself for her husband's death stood before the mirror. She expected to see guilt. Instead, the mirror showed her devotion, the love she gave, the moments of joy she created, and the fact that she had done her best. The truth relieved her shoulders. Sometimes fate writes tragedies, but love always remains blameless. 1 second later, a young boy with dreams too big for his village stood in front of the mirror. Everyone told him to stop dreaming, to accept his limits, but the mirror showed him flying, building, creating, and changing lives beyond what anyone expected. The truth shouted at him, "The world is shaped by dreamers who refuse to shrink." 1 second later, an addict trembling with weakness stood before the mirror. He expected shame, but the mirror showed him the courage of surviving each day, the possibility of breaking free, and the faces of loved ones still waiting for him. The truth whispered that even in chains, there is hope. 1 second later, a selfish woman who abandoned her family for pleasure looked at the mirror. She expected to see glamour, but the mirror showed the loneliness growing around her, the children crying for her, and the emptiness of chasing thrills that faded like smoke. The truth told her that love neglected turns into regret sharper than knives. 1 second later, an old man nearing death faced the mirror. He expected to see his tired body, but the mirror showed him the lives he touched, the kindness he spread, and the legacy of wisdom he left behind. The truth told him that death is not an end for those who lived with love. It is only a passage. 1 second later, a coward who always avoided standing for justice came to the mirror. He expected to see safety, but the mirror showed him silence that allowed evil to grow, injustice he ignored, and the regret of being alive but never truly living. The truth told him that neutrality is not peace, it is betrayal. 1 second later, a child abandoned by her parents looked into the mirror. She expected to see worthlessness, but the mirror showed resilience, survival, and a soul that refused to break. The truth told her she was not abandoned by life. She was chosen to grow stronger. 1 second later, the mirror reflected not just one person but humanity as a whole. It showed wars fueled by greed, families broken by lies, children crying for love, but also kindness that healed, hope that endured, but strength that rose. The truth was clear. Humanity is both fragile and powerful, and its future depends on which reflection it chooses to live by. 1 second later, the mirror became heavier in its silence. And the man who once thought he knew himself suddenly realized that his entire life had been built on borrowed identities. The mirror whispered through its reflection that he had worn the clothes of other people's expectations, smiled when the world wanted him to, cried only in hidden corners where nobody could see, and shaped his dreams according to what others thought was practical. The truth that appeared before him was not a punishment but an unveiling. He was not living his own story, but a collection of others' desires stitched together into a fragile mask. That realization burned in his chest like fire, but it was also strangely freeing. But when the lies fall apart, the soul begins to breathe for the first time. 1 second later, His memories began to rearrange themselves. But each moment he had believed to be a triumph started to look like a compromise. The day he accepted a job he did not love, the moment he stayed quiet when his heart screamed to speak, the hours he wasted pretending to be stronger or smarter just to win approval. All of them played like old films inside the mirror. He felt the sharp ache of regret, but also the sweetness of awareness. For the first time, he understood that mistakes are not the end of the story but the beginning of wisdom. The mirror showed him that pain becomes a teacher, and the truth, no matter how harsh, is the only path that leads to freedom. 1 second later, the man's body felt lighter, and though a burden he had carried for years was finally falling from his shoulders. The reflection no longer mocked him but embraced him with raw honesty. He realized the mirror was not an enemy but a guide, showing him the wounds he never treated, the fears he never confronted, and the lies he never stopped telling himself. By facing them, he was peeling away layers of illusion that had trapped him for so long. In the deep silence of his room, he whispered to himself, "This is me. This is who I truly am." And though those words trembled with both pain and relief, they were the beginning of his rebirth. 1 second later, the mirror grew darker, as if testing his courage. It showed him not just his face but the faces of people he had hurt with his silence, his anger, or his selfishness. Friends he had abandoned, family members he had ignored, promises he had broken. All of them appeared not to curse him, but to remind him that the truth carries responsibility. His heart sank under the weight of guilt, yet it also rose with determination. For he now knew that the truth is not only about knowing oneself but about repairing what has been broken. The mirror's reflection told him, to be free, you must not only face your past but also heal it. 1 second later, he saw his younger self in the mirror, a child full of innocence, wild dreams, and fearless curiosity. The boy looked at him with disappointment but also with hope, as if saying, "I am still here inside you. Do not let me die." Tears rolled down his cheeks, because he realized that somewhere along the path of life, he had betrayed that child by settling for less than he deserved. Yet the child's eyes reminded him that it was not too late to return, not too late to rediscover joy, not too late to live with honesty and passion. That single second felt like a lifetime, and in that moment, he silently promised to protect that child within him again. 1 second later, the mirror showed him the masks he had worn: the confident worker, the obedient son, the strong friend, the smiling stranger. Each mask peeled away like old skin, and underneath was a face that looked tired but real. It was scarred, imperfect, and vulnerable, and it was undeniably his own. For the first time in years, he touched his face in the mirror and accepted it. Acceptance did not mean liking everything he saw. It meant no longer running from it. The truth was not beautiful in the way magazines or movies define beauty, but it was beautiful in its honesty. And that honesty began to heal him more than any lie ever could. 1 second later, the man felt the silence in the room turn into a conversation between his soul and the reflection. The mirror asked without words, "Will you continue living in the shadows of lies? Or will you step into the light of truth, even if it burns at first?" He trembled at the question, or deep inside he knew the answer. Living in lies was comfortable but suffocating. Living in truth was painful but liberating. He chose liberation. At that instant, he felt like a prisoner unlocking his own chains, ready to walk into a world where every step might hurt, but every breath would be real. 1 second later, he saw that the truth was not only about himself but about the world around him. The mirror reflected not just his face but society's lies. People pretending to be happy while breaking inside, leaders hiding greed behind promises, families hiding pain behind forced smiles. The realization struck him hard. Everyone wears masks, everyone runs from the truth. But if one person dares to face it, maybe others will find the courage too. He understood that his journey was not only personal but also universal. By embracing his own truth, he might inspire others to face theirs. 49 1 second later, the mirror revealed his greatest fear: loneliness. For years, he had lied to himself, pretending that he didn't need connection, that he was fine alone. But the truth showed otherwise. He craved to be understood, to be loved not for his masks but for his true self. The reflection whispered, "You will never be free until you allow others to see the real you." That realization broke him. But it also lit a fire of courage. Because even though truth can push people away, it can also attract those who truly matter. He finally saw that loneliness was not a punishment but an invitation to open his heart. 51 seconds later, the man understood that the mirror's truth was endless, like an ocean. Each wave revealed another layer of his existence. His weaknesses, his strengths, his shadows, and his light. The mirror did not stop after showing him pain. It also showed him resilience. He remembered the times he had survived storms he thought would drown him, the moments he had lifted others even when he was broken himself, the strength that quietly lived in him despite all the lies. And in that second, he realized the truth was not only about wounds but also about power. He was not only broken, he was also unbreakable. 1 second later, the mirror turned into a river of memories, flowing through his mind with unstoppable force. He saw the nights when he stayed awake with silent tears, the mornings when he smiled for the world but felt empty inside, and the afternoons when he let opportunities slip away out of fear. Each scene broke his heart, but strangely it also stitched it back together. But for the first time he was not running, he was facing. The truth was not a weapon to destroy him but a mirror to rebuild him. He whispered to himself, "I survived all this. If I could survive the past, I can shape the future." 1 second later, the mirror showed him the weight of words, the ones he spoke carelessly, the ones he kept locked inside, and the ones he wished he had said. He remembered the times he hurt people with anger, the times he stayed silent when he should have defended someone, and the moments when his love went unspoken because of fear. The truth was cruel but necessary. Words can heal, but they can also wound. He felt regret, but he also felt a new strength growing within, the strength to speak honestly, kindly, but bravely from now on. 1 second later, he saw his relationships for what they truly were. Some people had loved him for his real self, while others only loved the mask he wore. The mirror showed the false friends who disappeared when life grew hard, and the rare souls who stayed even when he was at his lowest. He realized he had been blind, chasing approval from those who never cared, while ignoring the ones who truly mattered. The truth cut deep, but it also freed him. He no longer needed to waste his heart on those who could not see his worth. 1 second later, he felt the mirror challenge him. Will you change? But will you keep pretending? That question echoed inside his chest like thunder. He knew that truth without action is just another form of illusion. To live honestly, he would need to break habits, confront fears, and step away from comfort. The path ahead was terrifying, but the reflection gave him courage. Because now he knew, living a lie was far scarier than walking into the unknown. 1 second later, the mirror revealed the chains of comparison he had wrapped around himself. It showed him how often he measured his worth against others, their success, their beauty, their approval. The truth was bitter. He had been living someone else's race instead of his own. But in that same second, the chains began to dissolve. Because he realized that the mirror only showed him. His only competition was the man in the reflection. And his only duty was to become a better version of himself each day. 1 second later, he saw the shadow of fear that had followed him since childhood. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being truly seen. The mirror did not erase the fear but forced him to look at it directly. He understood now that fear thrives in darkness but weakens in the light of truth. He smiled for the first time, because he realized he did not have to be fearless to be free. He only needed to be honest about his fear and still move forward. 57 1 second later, the mirror uncovered the lies he had told himself about happiness. He had chased money, titles, and applause, believing they would fill the emptiness inside. But the reflection revealed a simple truth. Happiness was never outside. It was always within. It lived in small acts of kindness, in moments of gratitude, in the courage to be authentic. He laughed softly, almost bitterly, but with relief, because the truth he had avoided for years was actually the key to the joy he had always been searching for. 58 1 second later, the mirror grew brighter. But if rewarding him for his courage, it no longer showed only pain and mistakes but also dreams waiting to be born. He saw himself writing, creating, helping others, living a life of meaning. These visions were not fantasies but possibilities, hidden under the dust of lies. His heart raced with excitement, because he realized that truth was not an ending but a beginning. By embracing it, he had unlocked doors he didn't even know existed. 59 1 second later, the mirror showed him death, not as a threat but as a reminder. He saw how short life truly was, how fragile every breath could be. The truth struck him harder than ever. He had wasted too many days pretending, too many years waiting for the right time. The mirror whispered with silence. There is no right time. There is only now. That realization shook him to the core, because suddenly he understood that truth demands urgency. Tomorrow is not promised, but today is alive. 61 second later, he made a vow. Standing before the mirror, looking into his own raw reflection, he promised never again to hide behind masks. He promised to love with honesty, to speak with courage, to live with purpose. The mirror had shown him pain, regret, and fear, and it had also shown him strength, resilience, and light. He finally understood that the truth was not the enemy, it was the greatest gift. With tears in his eyes and a trembling smile, he whispered, "Thank you." 61 1 second later, the mirror faded, leaving only his reflection as it truly was, imperfect but real. He no longer needed visions or lessons. He had absorbed them all. He touched the glass gently, not as someone afraid, but as someone grateful. The room was quiet, yet his heart was alive with a new rhythm. For the first time, he did not feel like a stranger to himself. He belonged in his own skin, and that was the most powerful truth of all. 62 1 second later, the man felt as though the entire universe had shifted inside him. The world outside remained the same, but his eyes were different now. He no longer saw life as a battlefield of lies but as a canvas waiting for honesty to paint it. He realized that every choice from this moment on would either lead him back into shadows or forward into light. The responsibility was heavy, but it was also beautiful. But it was his alone to carry. 63 1 second later, he thought about forgiveness, not just of others but of himself. The mirror had shown him every scar, every mistake, every wrong turn. But the greatest truth was that carrying guilt forever would chain him to the past. To move forward, he had to let go. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and forgave himself for being human. That forgiveness was not an escape but a doorway into freedom. 64 1 second later, he realized the mirror was no longer just an object. It had become a symbol, a teacher, a companion that had revealed his soul. He knew he would never look at mirrors the same way again. From now on, every reflection would remind him, be honest, be real, be you. This truth was not temporary but eternal, and it would follow him wherever he went. 65 1 second later, the man walked away from the mirror, and the lessons walked with him. Each step felt lighter, freer, more alive. He carried no mask, no illusion, only himself, raw and imperfect but true. The world might still demand lies, but he had chosen differently. He had chosen the harder path, the honest path, the path of truth. 66 1 second later, he stepped outside and felt the sunlight hit his face. It was brighter than he remembered, not because the sun had changed but because he had. The truth had opened his eyes to beauty he had once overlooked, the warmth of light, the sound of birds, the laughter of children. Everything felt new, because he was finally seeing it with a soul unburdened by lies. 67 1 second later, he realized that the mirror's truth was a gift he could share. He didn't need to preach or force others to see what he had seen. He only needed to live authentically, and his life itself would become a mirror for others. By showing up as his true self, he could inspire others to do the same. And in that way, the truth would spread like light, one reflection at a time. 68 1 second later, he understood that the mirror's lesson was not about perfection but about authenticity. The world often demands flawless masks, but the truth demands nothing but honesty. He smiled, because now he knew he would never be perfect, and that was okay. What mattered was being real, being kind, being brave. That was enough. 69 1 second later, he felt a peace he had never known before. The storms inside him had not vanished, but they no longer controlled him. He was not afraid of them, because he had the anchor of truth. For the first time, his soul felt quiet, strong, and steady. The mirror had shown him pain, but it had also shown him peace. 71 seconds later, the story ended where it began, with a man and his reflection. But this time, the reflection was not a stranger or a lie. It was simply him, and that was the greatest truth of all, to look into the mirror, see yourself clearly, and finally say, "This is who I am," and that is enough.